Hello, everyone. Welcome to Song with Samvara. I'm happy you all made it today. So we're going to begin with meditation. We'll meditate for 3 songs. The first song on the navel chakra, the second on the heart, and the third on the third eye. So sit up nice and straight. And let's begin. Very nice. So today we're going to continue our exploration of Bodhicitta, the yoga of compassion. Today we'll talk about working with compassion. Working with compassion is bringing Bodhicitta as a practice into your work, into your career. Working with compassion is expanding your view of your job, of your work. It becomes not only what tasks you have to accomplish in a day for the job to get done, but it takes on a new dimension, a dimension of compassion. Instead of being, whatever your job description is, now it's your job description and bodhisattva. So we become bodhisattvas through our work. We also really develop a strong intention. In the intent through our mindful acts at work to bring liberation. We have a focus on bringing liberation from suffering for others. So this would be your customers, co-workers, even your boss. So we have this real strong focus and awareness of our interactions, our contact with people, and we want to bring strong practice of compassion to everyone that we come across in our work. So working with compassion it's really the highest way of right livelihood. And when we bring Bodhicitta into our work, we're able to really master the yoga of compassion. So the key thing here is work, meaning you got to work. You got to have a job. Because you can't do working with compassion if you don't have a job. If you're jobless, I have a few jokes about jobless people, but they just don't work. Right? So, but really, Bodhicitta is very, very strong practice at work because work's the best place for it. There's all sorts of things going on, right? Because if you're just sitting around, on a mountaintop, pondering Bodhicitta, pondering compassion, then it's not like real life. I mean, it is real life. But when you're at work and, your boss is yelling at you and things are behind schedule, then you have to really, truly practice Bodhicitta. So it makes it a very, very real, concrete experience of compassion. One of my older students came over to me and he was telling me about a difficult day at work. He's like, my boss yelled at me, my co-workers threw me under the bus, I'm totally stressed out, I should be getting paid more for this contract. And so, just complaining about all the difficult things, and I was just listening. And then he said, after a little bit, he was like, wow, what a great job I have. It's a Bodhicitta dojo. And I was like, yeah, that's right. This is the way it is. See, when you practice compassion at work, then the things that are painful or hard or difficult, you're able to transform them because you're bringing selfless spirit to a difficult situation. And instead of it just being karma, like something bad happens and you're sad, something bad happens and then you practice compassion. It transforms the experience. So when you practice compassion at work, you really start to love your work. Most people don't like their work very much. Most people think about their work, maybe they like their work marginally a little bit more than being homeless and hungry. Like most people don't have a good relationship with work. They have oh, it's stressful, oh, it's difficult. But I think it's okay. Maybe some people like going to work. They like going to work, but then it's that 8 hours where you have to wait in between going home that people just can't stand. So we have a very good relationship with work. When we practice compassion in work, it transforms our experience to become a very beautiful experience. And then we work with great impeccability. We do a very, very good job. We develop our careers to be very, very strong careers. So this is necessary. You can't kind of just like, not do a good job, because that's not compassionate. It's compassionate to do your best for your company and your team and your boss. You can't just kind of try to fly under the radar. I mean, this isn't Boeing. Well, yeah, that joke went down in flames. Bringing compassion to career makes our careers stronger, right? So you should always develop a very strong career and bring compassion to it. So a good sign of if you're doing compassion is that you are enjoying your work and that you're developing yourself, developing your career so that you're better, you're advancing. It's very important. You have to see that you're advancing in your physical life, advancing in your career. Then you're doing compassion in work correctly. Yeah. One of my students was working at an insurance company. I was talking to her and I said, how many employees work at your company? And she said, about half. And I was like, oh my gosh. So we don't just try to get by, we work hard. So all of the teachings of job yoga, we practice impeccably. But we also bring Bodhicitta, which is this intention to liberate people, to help people. And it's something that we really, really start to be mindfully aware of. So it's important to look at your job, look at your work, and to recognize that there's great benefits that you can bring through your work. And once you realize this, then your spirit is on fire, and then you're bright, and you can go to work and, nothing will get you down, because you will bring so much light of compassion. But you have to realize this. You have to recognize it. So there was, in the 1950s, a man who was selling encyclopedias door to door. His name was Jim McGinnis. Now, at that, somewhere in the 50s, he had been selling for 30 years. And that was his job. He didn't think much of it, right? He's just like selling, going door to door, just trying to make a buck, getting by, hauling these books with me, going over with all these books. You want to buy some? No. Okay, go somewhere else. So he was just like, going through his normal routine. And then one day, he was going over, knocked on someone's door. They opened the door. He was about to say, hey, want to buy some books? Then he had a heart attack. But he didn't die. He went to the hospital and had a surgery. So there was a doctor, Dr. Lalehi, in the University of Minnesota. He discovered a new technique for doing heart surgery. And it was a very successful technique. Before that, they didn't have very good chances of survival. So Dr. Lalehi, performed the surgery. It was a complete success. So the next day, when McGinnis was in bed recovering, Dr. Lalehi came in. He came in and said, how are you doing? Okay, you're doing well. And then he had a book. He opens up the book, and he takes out a card, and he says, "Is this you?" And then McGinnis looks at it. He said, "Yeah, that's one of my old business cards." And then he's like, "Why do you have this?" And he says, "My mother bought encyclopedias from you for my little brothers. I was about to go off to law school." And then he's like, "Then there were some books there. So I picked up one of the books, the one that started with H. I opened it up to heart." He's like, "And then I read it, and I thought the article was amazing." He's like, "So then I immediately decided that I would go into medical school instead of law school." He's like, "If you didn't sell my mom these books, then I probably wouldn't have gone into medical school and learned how to do this technique." He saved lots of people's lives with this surgery. He taught this surgery to hundreds of surgeons throughout the world. And then McGinnis was like, "Wow, that's amazing." So then when he recovered, he thought about his work differently. Instead of just hauling books, interesting, here, read, get some knowledge or something, he was like, "Wow, when I sell some of these books, it could change their lives, and it could heal me, it could be helpful for me, but it could also heal many other people. It has a tremendous impact." So he saw that opportunity. So then after that, when he was selling with great enthusiasm, really seeing that his work can have an extremely positive impact. So you gotta look at your job and what are you doing, and to start to see a bigger picture in your work. I remember I used to work at Bankers Trust in Manhattan, and it was a very strange kind of old building, and there was an elevator man you would walk into the elevator, and he had a little uniform, and then he'd say, "What floor?" And you'd say, "The 22nd floor," and he would push a button. That was his job. I don't know if they have these guys anymore. But, I thought, at first, this is ridiculous, this guy. Like, all he does is sit there and push buttons. What floor? Boom. What floor? Boom. And then, I worked there for a while, so I would listen to him, and he had worked there for over 20 years. And I was like, "Oh my gosh, that's like soul deadening, isn't it?" But then, I heard him talking more. He knew people. He would greet people. He would be very positive. He would find out things about their work, their family. He would ask about their work, ask about their family. And I remember one time he was talking to some guy, and the employee of Bankers Trust was saying, "Yeah, I had this new idea about, how we should do hedge funds." And, he started talking complex stuff about finance. And the elevator guy was like, "Pete, I agree with you. You should bring that up to your boss." He's like, "Really? Yeah, okay." And then another time, Pete's back on the elevator, and he's all like, "Hey, yeah, thanks. I brought it up to my boss. I wasn't going to do it, but I did, and my boss loved the idea. So now we're going to do this whole new thing." And so this guy, whose job was just to push the button, he actually really did a lot more. So there are different dimensions to your work, and you can bring support and help in many different ways. You might have a boring job, But even if you have a boring job, you have to say, what in my job can I do to help? Help, like, what's a weird job? You know those guys that are like holding signs on the side of the road? Sometimes they're like listening to music and dancing. I'm like, that's cool. Listen to music and dance if you have to do that. But also have an intention in your work to help people. You know, if you have a sign, there's a reason why you have it, right? You're promoting something that's supposed to be a positive service for people. Maybe you're sitting there, you have to have that intent. The right person's gonna see this sign, they're gonna get the right promotion, and then they're gonna be happy. This is gonna save them from something. You know, you might be like, you know, someone might be suffering from not getting proper cell phone coverage with Sprint. And you're like, Verizon, 4G network, it's for you. And then they'll get it, and then they'll be like, wow, I can make calls to my mom and be happy now. So, you know, it's like, you have to like really think about your job and say, what here am I doing that I can help? And have the intention to do it. Or, you know, like, let's say you have a job that just seems really bad, like you're a toilet cleaner. Ooh, that would be a tough job. And then you could say, how can I be compassionate in this job? I'm just cleaning toilets. Am I going to be compassionate to the toilet? No. You have to reflect. You got to think, I remember that one time I was on a road trip and I went to a gas station and I was like, ah! And then when you remember how bad it could be, and then you work really hard to make someone have a good, clean experience, then you'll say, I know I am bringing compassion to the world. So, yeah, whatever job you have, any job can be a woke job if you bring compassion to it. And, you know, you could be like a non-profit NGO aid worker. You could be a computer programmer. You could be a military general. Hey, doesn't that seem weird? You're like, that doesn't sound compassionate. But of course, we could look at the art of war. And the art of war has very, very powerful teachings of compassion. So long ago, I don't remember when, I think in the Han Dynasty, I think, there was a general named Tung Cho, and he had a conflict. The neighboring country wanted to, you know, take over. They wanted to attack. The neighboring country had an army 10 times as big as his army. So they were on the border, the big army, and he had to do something. Now, he was a student of the art of war. So when this conflict came up, he reflected on it. He said, what shall I do? Now, one of the most powerful teachings in the art of war is know yourself, know your opponent, and in every battle you will prevail. So he pondered this, and he had practiced meditation, and he was very, very strong in his you know, his studies of the arts of war. So he's like, I feel I know myself. But he said, I don't know my enemy. So he went out to talk to the opponent general. And the general thought that he was coming to just give up, right? It's like, okay, I'll accept your surrender, of course. But he comes out and he asks the general questions about his past battles, about what's important to him. And then you just kind of have a conversation. Now, the enemy general, he was kind of like, I know I'm going to win. And he's like bragging a little bit about the past. And so they have a good, long conversation. And then at the end of the conversation, Cho says, okay, thank you, nice to meet you. I guess I'll meet you in battle tomorrow. And the general's like, okay, but I already told you, you're not going to do good. So Cho learned a couple important things. He learned, one, that the general always fought to take territory. So he would fight on the battlefield to gain a certain territory. So he had to win ground. And when he won ground, and this was reported to his emperor, then his emperor really appreciated his service. So that was his goal in any battle. And then the second thing that he learned is that he really valued family, and that the greatest honor that he had ever had was when his ancestral village was being laid siege. So he was like, I went there, I fought off the bad guys, and then my whole family and village was happy. So then General Cho said, okay, now I can make a strategy now that I know my enemy. So the next day, the armies lined up on the battlefield, and then started off with bow and arrow, flaming arrows, just scorch the field and move around the other army a little bit. Then he sent in the cavalry, and they ran in, and then the army started moving around, and then they ran out, and then finally, so they're just like running around doing stuff, making commotion, acting like they want to fight, but then like not really doing anything. And then finally, the opponent general says, let's go. And the whole army moved in, and then Cho completely retreated. And then the general got his territory. And then, a few weeks later, the general said he started preparing to attack again, to take the next step, to take the next territory. But this time, Cho sent his cavalry to the ancestral village of the general. And then there was like walls, but they started like harassing the village. And then when the general heard this, he took his full army and went to save his village. And then Cho was able to take back his territory. And then after the big army gets there, the cavalry runs away, comes back and joins Cho's army. And then they keep doing this. They keep doing this, all right, we're facing each other. And then the retreat, and when the army's going to attack again, then we go and scare the village, and then he goes back. So they do this for a while. And then finally the emperor of the opposing state says, this is just too expensive. Let's just stop this war thing. So this is a compassionate act, because victory for Cho was not being defeated, and victory was having peace. And they were able to engage in battles where people didn't lose or people didn't die. And he was able to, this way, through compassionate means, outmaneuver the opponent. So you have to ask yourself, what do you do? How can you bring compassion into your work? And how can you understand your work in a compassionate way? Now, before I was a computer programmer, I was a waiter, and I was pondering compassion in my work. I was just like, I'm just a waiter, you know? I'm just like busy giving people food, and like it doesn't seem like it's a highly compassionate or anything. But then I pondered it. I thought about it. And I said, you know, my job, I'm bringing people sustenance to sustain their life and their body. And I'm helping people get rid of their hunger and to be happy from getting good food. And so I'm like, wow, this is actually a beautiful service, feeding people. So I started looking at it in that way, and I had that intent when I would bring people food. I'm not just like, here's some food, whoosh, throwing it out, right? I'd be like giving it to them with this awareness that this is something that sustains your life. And I was like, wow. And by doing that, it made me look at things in a new way, in a happy, bright way. And it was very positive. So you have to look at your job and say, what am I doing in my job? What am I bringing in my job? I remember one time, this large party came in. It was a family, like an extended family. There was like mom and dad, there was grandma and grandpa, there was a bunch of little kids, and a baby. And it was like just the funniest situation. It was crazy. They were super noisy. And everything strange happened. Like they were always complaining, they're all like yelling at each other. They're like sitting there across the table from each other going, you know what time it is? And I'm like, oh, whoa, wow. They were funny. And then everything terrible happened because the baby threw up on the floor and I had to clean it up. But the baby did it twice. And then one of the toddlers, knocked over his apple juice and the glass shattered. I had to clean it up. And he did it twice. But the thing that was funny was the mother. So it was a big party. It's like 10 or 12 people. And the mother constantly asked me for something. So she's all, waiter. I come over. And she said, can I have a straw? And I was like, okay. So I go, walk over, get a straw, come back. And she's like, can I have another straw? Okay. I walk over, come back. Then she's all like, can you top off my coffee? And then I'm like, okay. Go and get the coffee, come back. And then she's all, I need some more napkins. And I'm like, I got other tables. It's like I'm just constantly going. Every time I come back, she's got something else she wants. And then in the end, she's all, you know what, waiter? I'm like, what? I could use another straw. And I'm like, okay. It was the funniest thing. I just kept going back and forth. It was hilarious. But the grandfather was the best. He's like, all right, I'll have a beer. I'm like, okay. So I bring him a beer. And he's like, what's this? I wanted a Chardonnay. I wanted a glass of wine. I'm like, okay. So I go and bring him a glass of wine, put it there. And then he's quiet. Now, when I brought him his lasagna, right? I'm like, bring him his lasagna. And he's like, what's this? I ordered eggplant parmesan. And I'm like, no, it was lasagna. And then his daughter next to him, all, yeah, Pop, you got the lasagna. And he's all, no, I don't like lasagna. And she's like, you ordered it, you like it. And he's like, no, I hate it. It was hilarious. And I was like, no, okay, you keep the lasagna, I'll get you an eggplant parmesan. He's like, okay. And then I bring him the eggplant parmesan, and he goes, where the hell's my beer? It was ridiculously funny. And then, of course, they're bickering all the time. They're yelling at each other about, like, how to do laundry, how to dress the kids, the father not making enough money, all sorts of stuff. And they were stressed out. And so just the whole time, I just practiced Bodhicitta. I just practiced Bodhicitta because I was just practicing Bodhicitta. And I just, every time something went weird, I didn't get all riled up. I just was practicing compassion for everything that went wrong, them yelling at each other, everybody getting confused. And then I went over at the end and gave them the check. And then the father and the grandfather started fighting over it. Then finally the grandfather pulled it away. And he put a credit card in it. And then he put it out for me to take. And then I took it. He said, "You know, young man, you're a fine waiter." And then everybody at the table got quiet and looked at me, even the baby. It was weird. And then the grandmother was all, "And you have such a nice smile." And then every adult commented, and like the father, he got up and shook my hand. And I was like, okay, I'm glad you guys are happy. So then I went to process the credit card, and I noticed something. They all sat there completely silent, even the toddlers. And they were all they had this like look of contentment. I was like, wow, that's neat. Then I brought them the check, started working on another table. Then I hear them start arguing again. They're like, "No!" Arguing, just yelling, and then eventually they just got up and left in this big commotion. And then when they were gone, there was like this deafening silence. But anyway, I went back over to the table, and I got the check, opened it, and because they were arguing, the grandfather forgot to give me a tip. And I was all like, it didn't bother me because I was doing Bodhicitta. My work and my compassion are just an aspect of my practice, of my spiritual impeccability. So I had no expectations, I wasn't seeking anything from it. And this is a very important teaching from training the mind in compassion. There's a teaching, it's called abandon hoping for fruition. And this means don't do something to try to get anything out of it. Like when you're like, I'm doing this because I want this outcome, then what happens is you're setting yourself up for suffering. Even if you get what you want, you just create a stronger karmic pattern. When you have a hope for fruition, you are in the desire and aversion awareness. And in the desire and aversion awareness, this is something that kind of strengthens egoic reactions, egoic consciousness. It strengthens karmas. And when you go into desire and aversion, then you can't see your Buddha nature. You can't see the enlightenment within you. It fogs it. But when you abandon hoping, trying to get something or trying to keep something else away, when you abandon that idea, then you have a direct experience. You can accept whatever's happening. Whatever's happening. See, if you have a desire for something to turn out a certain way, then you're saying, whatever is truth in reality, I want it to be my way, something different. And then if something different that you want doesn't happen, then you're bothered. Then you are not accepting life, you're not accepting truth because you didn't get your way. So in the practice of Bodhicitta, we have to really accept life, not push so hard to try to make things work out the way we want. We have to accept what occurs, even if it's painful, even if there's pain and loss. If that's what is, then Bodhicitta is accepting that, not raging against life. This is a very important teaching. A lot of people do this. They like, oh yeah, I believe in God. Oh, and then a loved one dies, and then they go, I hate God. You know, a lot of people do that. They go, how could God take away this person I love? Well, in Bodhicitta, we have to open our heart big enough to understand life, accept life, to be able to take in even pain and loss. This is the way. It's very important. Now, when I was with the family, serving them, I had some difficulties, but I was just able to take it in from practicing Bodhicitta. And then it made me quite happy, actually. I was in a very positive state of mind. But I wasn't doing it so that I could be in a positive state of mind. So if you're doing Bodhicitta, you're doing it because you want to feel good, then you're hoping for an outcome from your practice. So you can't hope for an outcome from your practice. You just have to practice. Practice for the sake of practice. Bodhicitta for the sake of Bodhicitta. Yeah. And you can't expect from doing Bodhicitta that the other person's going to get fixed, right? You see someone who's suffering, and if you practice Bodhicitta, you'll say, I'm taking and sending, and then they're still sad, and you're like, what's wrong with you? I did a Bodhicitta on you. You idiot. Right? No, you just have to just do it. and a lot of times, you will not notice anything in the other person when you do Bodhicitta. It's subtle. Bodhicitta affects what we call the causal body, like the spirit of the person, of the other person. And it's something that, well, let's see. Buddha said that a bucket is filled drop by drop, right? So it takes some time, very often, for someone to get that influence and for them to learn from it. The Dharma is realized over time. It's kind of like if there was a baby or a child, and the child is given, chicken and peas, and the child's like, no, I want ice cream, and the child's crying and angry and frustrated and filled with this desire to get ice cream, and the mother's like, now, you must eat your protein and vegetables. So the mother knows that this is what is actually the Dharma for the healthy body, and that having ice cream for dinner wouldn't be healthy. So the mother knows what the Dharma is and is influencing the baby, but the baby might just sit there and be mad the whole time. So Bodhicitta is the Dharma, and Bodhicitta does affect someone's spirit, but it takes maybe a little while for them to grow up and go, wow, my mom fed me right, and now I know what's right. So when you're doing Bodhicitta, don't expect that the other person's going to go, I'm angry, and now I'm happy. It does happen. If you have strong Bodhicitta, it does happen sometimes. Don't expect it. And don't expect that your Bodhicitta is going to make you happy. Have no expectations. All you try to do is perfect practice. So we're going to do an exercise of perfect practice. And this is going to be a meditation. I'd like you to focus on the navel chakra. And we're going to sit in meditation. And you're going to abandon hoping for fruition. So in your meditation, you're not going to try to get anything out of it. You're not going to try to get a state of mind, peace, and I don't know, what else are you guys looking for? Enlightenment? So we're just going to sit and meditate and abandoning hoping for anything. We're just going to do it just to do it. All right. So one song. Let's begin. So when we do our work, when we're working with compassion, we do an impeccable job, we work hard, but we also abandon hoping for fruition. If you work hard and you are impeccable and you have compassion, you will succeed in your career. You don't have to sit there going, I want to get this bonus or whatever. There's a dharma of growth that naturally occurs. So, impeccability is important. Working hard is important. When you work with compassion, you tend to work hard. You tend to develop yourself in the strongest ways so that you can be capable in carrying out the duties of your job. So we tend to work really hard. We do a lot. You don't, when you're working with compassion, you're not trying to do the minimum, you're trying to do the maximum. And that's what helps your company, your team, your boss. Now, you don't lose anything by doing this. You gain. So you become stronger, a stronger attention, a stronger ability to do your work. You develop your character, you develop your bodhicitta, you develop your physical attention to detail. So this is how we train ourselves and develop ourselves. It's funny, in the West, we have this very kind of bad understanding of compassion. It starts with a religious story of the death of Jesus Christ. So this is like the church puts this forth and says, now this is compassion. Jesus died for your sins, right? So wow, he gave the ultimate sacrifice for your sins. And then we're all like, oh, so compassion is like, getting beaten terribly and then hung up on a cross. Okay. So you feel like there's a loss. But first of all, Jesus never said, I'm dying for your sins. That was Mark, one of his apostles. He said that after. He tried to put a good spin on it. Luke had a different idea. Luke said, we sin. He was like, look, we killed this guy. We sin, and therefore we need to turn to God. But somehow it's pushed out in the consciousness of Westerners. Compassion is, giving up something. But in Buddhism, we have a very different take on it. We have this understanding that compassion is fun. Like when you're working in compassion, it's fun. You might do a lot of work. You might give up, playing video games, which is fun for you, but you might give that up and actually do some more work and develop your personal power. But you'll find that developing your personal power, working hard, is actually fun. So we have to develop ourselves, work hard, but recognize that it is actually very, very fun. Let's see. Starbucks in 2008. That was the Great Recession, and their business was, in 2008, took a big hit, a 30% loss in profits. And they had to close down 1,000 Starbucks stores. Even some of their flagship Starbucks stores, like the one on Fifth Avenue, the one on Rodeo Drive, the one on Sesame Street. Now that's why Oscar's such a grouch. He didn't get his morning coffee. So Howard Schultz comes to this situation and he says, we got to do something. And what he came up with is, he said, we have to focus on our customers. We have to see where they're at and what they need. $7 cup of coffee. what do they need? He's like, we need to find out what our customers need. So then he created this thing called My Starbucks, or something like that. No, My Starbucks Idea. And this is where people went on the website and came up with ideas, Starbucks customers. And they came up with 90,000 ideas. And Howard Schultz went through every single one of those ideas. He went through all of them, considered all of them, and then he came up with 100 new, he took 100 of those ideas and he put them into practice. And one of those ideas was bringing back the s'mores Frappuccino. That's a good one, right? Yeah. But it has like 500 calories. So it's like, the s'more Frappuccino is for the American who, needs to gain weight. That was a good idea. That's what people wanted. They needed to gain s'more weight. So it's like, but that's what the people wanted. That was their ideas. And then when these things were implemented, then all of a sudden, Starbucks started coming back. And by 2010, they had grown 20 times. So it was very successful. And Howard Schultz said, it was a lot of work, a lot of late nights. And he went through all of these ideas, really thought about what would work. And then he said, but it was fun. It was fun getting it right for my customers. So that's good. So when you have compassion in your work, there's realization. You start to see things that you didn't see before. When you don't have compassion, you're stuck into kind of a self mode, self-karma. It's limited awareness. But when you have compassion, then all of a sudden, new doors open, inner doors, outer doors. You start to see new things, new opportunities, new possibilities for happiness and success. So, long ago, it's a story about Tara, a bodhisattva. This was supposed to be eons ago somewhere. There was a spiritual aspirant, and he went to a master and said, Master, I wish to have teachings of Tara, because Tara gave these beautiful enlightened teachings, but she was, this bodhisattva that was kind of hard to find, very hard to find. And then the master says, I know what to do. He says, I'm going to give you this power. It's a power of healing. So he gives him this power. And then he says, now if you go out and practice compassion, Tara will come and teach you. So he says, thank you, Master. And he goes out, and then he starts healing the sick. So all day long he would sit there, someone sick would come, he would heal them. Someone sick would come, he would heal them. And he did this for months. One day, this wealthy woman comes by in a big gaudy dress and all jewelry, and she's crying. And he's like, what can I do to heal you? And she says, my door's stuck. And he's like, what? She's like, I don't know, it's the lock or something. I have a mansion over there, and I can't get in. And she's crying. And then she's all, can you help me? And he's like, I'm not a lockpick. He's like, I'm a healer. And he's like, I can't help you. So she goes away. And then he keeps on healing for months. And then she would come back. And she came back crying again. And then he's like, what is it? Something hurting you? And she's like, my stove is broken. She's crying. My stove is broken. Can you fix it? And he's like, I'm not a repairman. I don't know. I don't even know how to do that. I'm a healer. Look, I heal. And then he's like, I can't help you. So she goes away. And then every few months she would come back crying about some maintenance problem in her house. But he's like healing for, years. And then he gets into this moment of despair. He's like, I'm healing all who come to me. I spent all day doing it. I do it every day. And then he says, and Tara never comes. So then he starts feeling bad and he cries. So he's crying and feeling bad. Where is Tara? And then the rich lady comes back and she's crying. And then in that moment, he goes, oh, look, I'm feeling so bad, but look, she seems to be feeling really bad too. And finally he goes, okay, well, what is it this time? And she says, oh, it's a broken floorboard. And then he goes, okay, I'll do my best to help you. So he goes over to her mansion, goes in, fixes the floorboard, and then all of a sudden, as soon as he fixes it, whoosh, there's this flash of light. And then he's in this world of light, and Tara is standing before him. And Tara says, through an act of compassion, am I available? And he's like, well, I was doing all that healing. And she's like, you didn't do it from compassion. You finally did compassion for helping somebody because you finally had some compassion. And then, so she gives him this teaching, and he becomes enlightened. Realization, poof. And then he goes back and he continues healing, this time with true compassion. And then he also checks in on the rich lady, and he becomes a pretty good carpenter. Now, let's see. There's Jim Warner worked for a company called Computer Associates, a big software company. And this was in, I think, the early 90s. And they were doing this e-learning initiative where they would do back then they did them on CD-ROMs. And it's like you put it in the computer and it spins around and you start doing some stuff. And so they had created this software and they were testing it with children. And they were doing this reading e-learning program, and the kids were not doing well with it. Like, they weren't really learning from it. Like, the results were not good. And there was this one kid who, he had trouble reading, and then he started using this e-learning thing that was supposed to help him, and it made him more upset. So then he just in the test, he bursts into tears, and then, Jim is like, oh no, sorry. I'm like, our software's hurting these people. So anyway, so eventually the VP, says, no, yeah, so the VP goes, okay, wait, this just isn't working. So they quit the initiative. But Jim kept on thinking about that kid and the troubles that kids had learning, reading. And then he came up with an innovation our software should have actually done this, and that would have fixed it. And then he goes to the senior VP, and they go, no, we already put so much money into that, we're not going to go back there. So then Jim kept on pondering it, and kept on thinking about that kid. And then, all of a sudden, this idea came into his mind. What if I quit my awesome job as a senior director here at CA and start my own company? It's a lot of risk, but I think I know how to make that software work to help that kid and other kids like him so that he could read good. And then, so he went out and he created a company called LearnTech, and they created spelling and reading and math e-learning software, and then it was very, very successful. He was very successful building that. And it was something where he was able to come from a place of compassion and create a big business success for himself. I think finally, there's a story of Dave Thomas, who is the founder of Wendy's, right? So Dave Thomas was interesting. It's like there was McDonald's and Burger King, right? And it's like, I'm going to start a franchise fast food chain, Wendy's old-fashioned hamburgers. And he knew Colonel Sanders, and Colonel Sanders was like, I do chicken. I mean, like, there's a good market niche, right? Like, you're going to go up against McDonald's and Burger King? How are you going to be successful? And he's like, I don't know. He's like, but there's something, I got something I need to express in this business. So he opens Wendy's, and it grows and becomes like the fifth biggest, franchise fast food chain in the country. And at some point, he realized why it was successful. And it was because he cared about the customer. So he had from his upbringing, he had an honest care for service. He had a deep care for the customer's well-being. So in an interview, someone said, how did you realize that it was that care that made you successful? And he said, And he said, it's like this. In the beginning, there was nothing. And then God said, let there be light. And then there was still nothing, but everyone saw it. This is funny. It's kind of very Zen, right? Anyway, now I'm going to do the esoteric transmission of working with compassion. This is a time where we're going to meditate, focus on the third eye. You're just going to look up here towards me, abandon hoping for fruition. Just relax. Just sit up straight, soft focus, look up here towards me. This is where I do a transmission. It's a transmission of Kundalini energy. And it's in a certain form, a structure that develops your awareness towards compassion. So it's a direct spiritual experience. So we'll just sit for one song. Good. All right, let's begin. Very nice. Well, it was lovely sitting with you today. I wish you all well with your practice of compassion at work. Okay, thanks.